All right, so we're going to dive into some of the CSS and markup that will allow us to create our kind of nice looking page here. First thing we're going to do, remember all we have on our page right now is just a h1 tag at the top. So let's start where we would normally start, which is to take our images and our text and just get them into our index markup here. So again, all I've got is an h1 tag. So let's say that I wanted to include, let's see, div, we'll call it text for our text container, and we will create a div for our image container, which I will call, yeah, image div, why not? So text-div and image-div, and each one of these, I'm going to do 3 pairs, right? Because I've got 3 images and I've got 3 pieces of text. So if I were to put these on the page normally, I'd do something like, let's see, I'll write cyclone, wonder wheel, and parachute, right? So remember the content we're working with here. I've got 3 images: the Coney Island cyclone, the wonder wheel, and the parachute ride. And under text, I've got just a title with a description, title, description, title, description, right? So 3 things that are alike in that they've got an image with it and they've got text with it. So that's our basic markup, right? Inside of our image div, I'm using the div as a container, and I'm going to put the actual image tag inside of that container. So the image will have a source, and that source is just going to be, well, we should move these over first. Let's do that. Let's drag our images over into our working file here. So these will all be not in a folder, but rather just at the same top level as the rest of our documents here. So the source then for our first image would just be cyclone.jpg, and no class name on it to begin with. I'll just cut and paste that into these other places here and just rename the file. So wonder-wheel and parachute. Okay, so if I click over to our page now, I'm going to have these things on our page, and they're gonna show up at their natural size, right? What do I mean by natural size? I mean, we haven't defined any styles for these yet, so whatever size the images are, that's what size they're going to show up on the page. The text is just going to show up as basic unstyled text on the page. So far, it's not much of a layout, right? You wouldn't really want to read this page because it's kind of ugly. So let's do a little work on this. Without even getting into our own style sheet, we're going to just use some of the classes that are already available to us in the Bootstrap CSS. The first one we're going to look at is, well, columns, right? So Bootstrap uses this really great convention of rows and columns. Rows we haven't covered yet. We talked a little bit about how the columns flow, in a 12-column grid. But rows are what distinguish blocks of content, one to the next to the next. And I'm going to do a search here on this page for rows. There we go. The grid system. All right, let's read through this briefly here. Bootstrap includes a responsive, mobile-first, fluid grid system that appropriately scales up to 12 columns as the device or viewport size increases, right? We covered that in the last video. It includes predefined classes for easy layout options, as well as powerful mixins for generating more semantic layouts. We're not going to worry about mixins. That's a whole other thing. But the predefined classes we very much want to play around with here. So under the introduction, we explained that grid systems are used for creating page layouts through a series of rows and columns that house your content. Rows must be placed within a container, fixed with, or container fluid for proper alignment and padding. What does that mean? It means we're going to wrap our entire whole block of markup inside of a div with a class of container. Why? Because all of our styles are going to work relative to that parent style, which might sound kind of confusing. But we're just going to drop it on the page and we're going to see what difference that makes. So currently we have everything just left aligned, just flush all the way to the left. But I've written this new class in here called, wrapped everything inside of a div with the class container. And what do we get? Now everything kind of bumps over from the left. There was something else mentioned in here, which was that we could use container or we could use container-fluid. Let's see what container-fluid would do. We bump over a little bit from the left, but now we're not centered on the page in the same way, so it's a little bit different. But notice that our text, when our screen gets smaller, actually wraps down to the next line. That's a responsive property. We'll start to look at the classes on this stuff here in a minute, but first I want to kind of get a little bit farther with this CSS structure that we're reading through here. Use rows to create horizontal groups of columns. What does that mean? It means that for each of our, well, in our case, we have pairs of content, right? We have text and we have images. You can think of each one of those things as existing in a row. They're grouped together, right? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write div class equals row, and I'm going to wrap that around each one of our text and image pairs. Sometimes if you're looking at the markup on a page, you can do inspect element on something you come across on the web. If you see this style, this convention of rows, that's most likely using the Bootstrap framework. It's kind of one of the telltale signatures of Bootstrap. So I'll hit save there and come over to our page and see if anything changes. Well, so far it really doesn't look any different, and in fact we've sort of bumped weirdly over to the left again. I'm going to take the fluid off of our container here. So it's just going to be div class container as our wrapper. And I'm going to come back to our page here, and now I'm going to get into the, now is where we actually kick into the to the column styles. Excuse me. So content should be placed within columns, and only columns may be immediate children of rows. What does that mean? It means that columns need to exist inside of rows. So we have 3 rows defined, 1, 2, 3, and then content inside of each. Our content inside of our rows consists of 2 divs, a text div and an image div. So these are the things that we want to break into rows. So again, we're working on the 12-column grid. We've got text and we've got an image. So let's say that we want to break this into 1/4 of the page and 3/4 of the page. So 1/4 of the page for text, 3/4 of the page for the image. Well, I'm going to add a class for column medium 3 for 1/4, right? 3 into 12 is 1/4 of 12. And, oops, put that in the wrong place. Under text. And then for the image, I'm going to make this column medium 9. And let's just see what that first one looks like on our page. So I reload. You'll see that I've got text now. Instead of stacking on top of my image, the text is on the left of the image, and then the image begins approximately a quarter of the way into the page. So I will continue that in each of these other rows here. So that will be consistent through our page. Oops. 9 and 3. So again, 3 and 9, 3 and 9, 3 and 9. We'll save this and reload our page, and now we've got text appearing to the left of all three of our images, but our images are still enormous, right? So what's going on there? One thing I'm going to do is something we covered last week. It's just this way to kind of see what our grid looks like right now. I'm going to apply an outline to all of our divs, and this will help us see what our page looks like. Okay, so there we go. We've got 1/4 of the page, and we've got 3/4 of the page, and it looks like our images are, well, the first one's overflowing that div, the second one doesn't fill it, the third one doesn't fill it either. So we need something that tells the image on the inside to expand or contract to the size of its parent, right? Because our image is nested inside of just a regular div container. So Bootstrap has a really great answer for this. We're going to skip down to responsive utilities, and we're going to look for responsive images. And where'd it go? Responsive images. Responsive utilities. Responsive utilities. I'm going to type into the Finder responsive images. Alright, it's on this page, but anyway, what we're looking for is a class called img-responsive. So let's just read this real quick. Images in Bootstrap 3 can be made responsive friendly via the addition of the image responsive class. This applies max width 100% and height auto to the image so that it scales nicely to the parent element. What does that mean? Well, let's just drop it in and see what happens. So under image, I'm going to add class, which currently has no class. We're going to add a class, image-responsive. I'm going to hit save, and now when we click over to our page, look at that. The image expands neatly to fill the div, but does not overflow it. So let's expand that all the way down the page. Grab that class. I'm going to put it inside this image. Be careful to put it outside of the quotes in your source property. And now, if we reload our page, we should get interesting. So it doesn't fill the div, but it does scale down nicely. So we have a little bit of an issue here. The issue is that our image doesn't fill our div all the way. It's just not big enough. So we've probably made our grid the wrong proportion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say instead of 3 and 9, I'm going to make the text wider and the image a little narrower. Let's go 5 and 7. Right? Still equals 12. So does that make sense? Our text column is 5 and our image column is 7 in each of our 3 rows. I'm going to refresh the page, and now we get something that's a little more uniform. And very importantly, when we grab the edge of our browser, we scale it down, and we get this nice uniform just stack, right? And our text, which is to the left of our image in our large layout, jumps to the top of our image in our contracted layout. So there we go. I'm going to pause right there, and we're going to head into the next video where we're going to go a little bit farther with this and hopefully take a look at a couple of basic navigation elements.